Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello and welcome to episode 884 with Dr. Cassie Holmes. Do you ever feel like you just don't have enough time? Well, Cassie's got a wealth of wisdom on how we can feel more time rich and enjoy the time we do spend at work, at home, or wherever you are for all the more meaning, fulfillment, and goodness. She'll learn 1, why more time doesn't always make us more happy. 2 tricks to make drudgery feel more enjoyable. And 3, how to keep distractions from hijacking your attention. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we reference here, please visit us over at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP884. Now here's a bit about Cassie. Cassie Holmes is a professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, an award-winning teacher and researcher on time and happiness, and author of Happier Hour, How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. Happier Hour was selected as a Forbes must-read and a Next Big Idea Club must-read for 2022, as well as an Amazon Best Business Book of 2022. It's also been featured in the Wall Street Journal, The Today Show, CBS Morning, and much other media. Holmes' academic research has been widely published in leading academic journals and featured in such outlets as The Economist, The New York Times, The Atlantic, and many more. Her course that she developed and now teaches, Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design, is among UCLA's most popular for MBAs. Prior to joining UCLA, Cassie was a tenured faculty member at Wharton, and she got her Ph.D. from Stanford's Graduate School of Business and a BA from Columbia. Big thanks to Cassie for sharing her wisdom with us, and big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. Now, here's Cassie. Cassie, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Hi, Pete. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm excited to talk about the wisdom in your latest work here, Happier Hour, how to beat distraction, expand your time, and focus on what matters most. And I understand you had some happy hours, hopefully, recently on vacation. What's the story here?
Yeah. Well, getting back from the 4th of July weekend, we had a great time up in Carmel Valley with good friends back from our business school days and their kids and our kids. And we picked up our kids from sleepaway camp. This was their first time away. And they were dirty, but happy. And it was just fun to be outside in the sunshine with live music and yummy food and friends. What better than that?
Yeah, that does sound great. I was just going to ask, what are some themes associated with your happiest hours? And maybe you've already listed a few. Any other key ingredients?
We'll pick up some of these probably many times during our conversation because it all sort of goes back to those simple things of those relationships with the people that we love, noticing those simple moments and making the most of them. And so, it's people.
Okay, makes sense. People, I hear you. Well, so tell us, as you're putting together and researching Happier Hour, any particularly surprising or counterintuitive discoveries you've made on the journey?
Yeah, so I think that what Happier Hour is, it's sort of me pulling together my entire career of research on how we think about and spend our time for greater happiness and joy in our lives. And what's interesting about that is that my relationship with time actually started off as not very happy at all. In fact, I felt for me, for my own personal happiness, time proved to be the single biggest barrier. And I share a story that I used to open the book, which I think many can relate to and very much motivated my research agenda since, as well as writing the book to help others by applying what I found in my research to their lives. Is that it was this day earlier in my career when I was still an assistant professor living in Philly. I was at Wharton at the time. And I traveled up to New York to give a talk that day. And it was sandwiched between back-to-back meetings. And then I'm rushing from those meetings, then to this networking dinner, and then rushing to catch the very last train that would get me home to my 4-month-old and my husband asleep in Philly. And I made the train that night, but I remember so vividly, I was absolutely exhausted. And I was like, I don't know if I can keep up, right? Between the pressures of work, wanting to be a good partner, wanting to be a good parent, wanting to be a good friend, the never-ending pile of chores, there simply were not enough hours in the day to get it all done, let alone to do any of it well, let alone to enjoy any of it along the way. And that feeling, which now in my research, what we've been sort of unpacking is what we refer to as time poverty. It's this acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And it's a really bad feeling. And in my experience of that on the train that night, I actually considered quitting. I considered quitting my entire sort of career that I'd worked so hard for, thinking that if only I had a whole lot more time, then I would be happier. But before I sort of marched into my boss's office, I'm like, I quit. And before telling my husband, we need to pack up our house, we're moving to the beach, where this relaxing existence I was daydreaming about would occur. I was like, is it true? Is it true that people who have a whole lot more time are in fact happier? And I recognize this is an empirical question and one as a social psychologist that I could test and should test. And so I did. And I recruited a couple of my favorite collaborators, Hal Hirschfield and Marissa Sharif. And we looked at what's the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness. And what we found across our studies, including our analysis of the American Time Use Survey data that looks at for tens of thousands of working as well as non-working Americans, how they spent a regular day. And we could calculate how much time they spend on discretionary activities and relate that to their happiness. And what we found was, to answer your question, a surprising finding, was this surprising pattern of results, which was basically an upside down U shape. And this is interesting because what it means is that happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum. So yes, people with too little time are less happy, those time poor amongst us. But what was also interesting was that other side. And that surprising side was that there is such thing as having too much time, that we found that those with a whole lot of discretionary time were also less happy. And then digging into the data, they're unhappy for different reasons, and we can talk about that. But I think it's absolutely surprising and an important finding for us to keep in mind in those sort of hurried days where we do feel time poor. It sort of cautions us away from quitting and tells us that, in fact, for greater happiness, it's not about necessarily having a whole lot more time available to spend however you want. In fact, it's actually how you invest the time that you have available. And that's actually then what propelled my research agenda since, is how do we invest the hours of our days so that we feel more satisfied in our days, so that we feel joy along the way, so that looking back at the end of the week, even if we're busy, we feel fulfilled as opposed to just having an overly full schedule.
Well, Cassie, there's so much good stuff in here, and we're going to have fun digging into this.
Where do we start?
Well, Cassie, I don't know if this surprises you, but I have actually been on the Bureau of Labor Statistics American Time Use Study survey numerous times.
Oh, great.
For my own fun. That's right. I've researched things for fun. And so first, let's just confirm that this is legit, if I may, because you'll know this so much better than I. Because when I'm up in there, I am surprised at certain numbers. Like, how is that even possible? Like the average amount, hours per day, civilian population spent on housework is 0.57 hours. So can you maybe, first of all, for the sliver of the audience who has nerdily crawled all over the American Time Use Survey, can you confirm that it is more or less valid and legit, and share why I see some numbers that I find hard to believe?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when you do dig into the data, and I actually would say, even before you dig in, if you're not digging in, if you're just looking sort of at that first glance at averages and some of like the maxes and means of the various variables, that's where you're like, what the heck? How is it possible, for instance, in some of our analysis of the amount of discretionary time people have, that they are spending, 20 hours of discretionary time, which discretionary time are spending on activities that people want to do. And so I'm like, well, when do they sleep? They only have 4 hours to sleep, and there are chores. And for many of us, it's more than 5 hours. So what I would say is that this is based off of data, averaging across a whole bunch of people, and it's sort of capturing a particular day. And what you need to do is look at what are the patterns, like the overall patterns, so that you're not relying on one weirdo who has literally, watched TV for 20 hours in a row, discretionary activity, and slept only 4 hours and not done anything else. Is you're looking at, all right, what are some actual interactions and moderations, and who is feeling these particular ways, and how are they spending their time? Now, what we wanted to make sure is that so that we're not sort of relying on any one idiosyncratic person and or relying so heavily on just averages, looking at, okay, if we cut up the data in different ways, how does this pattern play out? But what's so interesting is this pattern, this such thing, or this finding that there's too little or too much that is bad and that is associated with less happiness is quite telling, and is going to how we even calculate what does it mean to spend time on discretionary activities. We didn't want to rely on our own idiosyncrasies of what are activities that people want to do versus obligatory activities that folks have to do. And so what we did is that we took all the activities from the American Time Use Survey. So it's like 139 activities. And we presented them to a sample of 500 individuals. And we asked them, is this a discretionary activity? Is it something that you want to do? And we said that we would count any activity that more than 90% agreed was discretionary.
Okay.
And those activities that more than 90% identified as discretionary included passive leisure. So this is watching TV, relaxing. It is also, though, includes active leisure, like playing sports, engaging in a hobby, exercise. It also includes spending time with family and friends. So this is what we calculate for each individual. Now we're getting into the weeds. You like have me start talking about data, which people never ask about. It's like, but actually, interestingly, this pattern emerges, this negative quadratic relationship, also when we used the sort of 75% of people agreed. So it is robust. This having too little time is bad, and digging into the data for why with additional studies, the answer is that it's, and for those who are time poor, this is no surprise, it is heightened feelings of stress. How could it be that other side of the spectrum? How could having a whole lot of hours in the day to spend exactly how you wanted be associated with less happiness? And what we found is that we are driven to be somewhat productive. We are averse to being idle. And so when we spend all the hours of our days, day in and day out, this isn't vacation, with nothing to show for it, it undermines our sense of purpose. And from that, we feel less productive. And without that sense of purpose, we feel less satisfied. And what's interesting is that we saw as additional sort of evidence to this role of purpose and wanting to be somewhat productive with the time that we spend, we found that those who actually engaged in discretionary activities, that they are quote unquote productive and worthwhile, like exercise, like engaging in an enriching hobby, actually like investing in relationships, spending time with family and friends, you don't see the too much time effect. It's actually the too much time effect is driven by spending a whole lot of those hours in the day in ways that are discretionary, things that you want to do, but it's more of that passive leisure.
That's interesting. So folks who are spending tons of discretionary time can break the rules of the upside down U if that discretionary time is high quality family, friends, hobbies, instead of Netflix binging.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And then also quick data clarification. How are we measuring quote unquote happy?
Yeah. So with the American Time Use Survey, it's people reporting I think it was on a 5-point scale, how satisfied they are with life.
Okay. So lay it on us then on the upside down U, or what is the magic sweet spot that puts us in the top happy spot we want to be? How much discretionary activity time?
Well, we find that, and I wouldn't want to sort of hang my hat on these exact numbers, but in the American Time Use Survey data, we found that between 2 and 5 hours of discretionary time is that sweet spot. That is, those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in the day, they were less happy because of those heightened feelings of stress. Those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day were also less happy because of a lacking sense of purpose. But I would say that what is more, I think the bigger takeaway here is that it is not so much about how much available time you have or how much discretionary time you have. It's really when you're engaging in activities that feel worthwhile, and they can feel worthwhile from different sources. They can feel worthwhile because they bring you joy. They can feel worthwhile because they give you that sense that you are being productive and contributing. They can feel worthwhile when rightly placed because they are rejuvenating and relaxing. So it's about identifying for yourself, what are those worthwhile ways of spending? But also, when you're spending that time, how are you engaged? What is your mindset? And it's these sort of at a very high level is the answer here. And then I would love to talk about some of the strategies for folks to identify for themselves. Okay, what are those worthwhile activities for you? So we're not relying on averages across people or even averages across a particular example of any type of activity, but also some strategies that when you're spending that time, how do you make the most of it? How do you make it so that those hours that you're spending are in fact happier? And yet another sort of answer for you asked me, what are some surprising findings? Perhaps even the most surprising. I think one was that too much time is a thing and that having a whole lot more time isn't necessarily better. But another is that there is incredible amount of happiness available to us in the time that we're already spending. But so often we're missing and not noticing it. And so the extraordinary happiness that can come from ordinary moments, if we are paying attention, if we are engaged in the activity in that time in such a way to make the most of it, can be so, so powerful.
Well, yes, that's beautiful. Let's do exactly that. First, let's talk about worthwhile. How do we get really clear on what is worthwhile and not worthwhile for us individually?
Yeah. So the research, it tracks people's time. So how are you spending your time over the course of the day? And how are you feeling over the course of the day? So researchers can pull out on average, what are those activities that tend to be associated with the most positive emotion? What are those activities that tend to be associated with the most negative emotion? That research points to our happiest activities being social connection. So whether intimately or physically, as well as spending time with family and friends. Our least happy activities tend to be commuting, work, and housework, which is a bummer because those three activities together comprise a bulk of our work week. But again, as I said before, those are based off of averages. So the average person, as well as the average example of any one of those activities. But of course, within your work hours, there are some activities that are going to be more fulfilling and worthwhile and others that aren't. So what I encourage folks to do is to track your own time over the course of a week, writing down, and there's a super simple PDF sheet that you can download from my website if helpful. Basically, for every half hour, writing down, what are you doing? What's the activity? And being more specific than just working or socializing. If you're working, what is the work task? If you're socializing, whom are you with and what are you doing? And as importantly, rating as you're coming out of that half hour, coming out of that activity on a 10-point scale, how happy are you? And not this sort of it was just enjoyable. It is when people are rating their happiness, it's it is picking up on how satisfied do you feel? How worthwhile was it? And so while admittedly, it is tedious to track your time over the course of the week, it's totally worth it because you have this fantastic personalized data set that you can look for yourself, looking across your activities or your rating sheet, your time tracker. You can see what are those activities that got your highest ratings. And what's as helpful is not just looking at the particular activities that are your sort of highest ratings versus your lowest ratings, but what are some commonalities among them? So you might find, for instance, when I did this, I found for myself, it wasn't socializing per se that was necessarily fun. For me, it was one-on-one time. Whether with a friend, whether with a family member, as opposed to the whole group going out. Also, I found in my work hours, actually going on a coffee walk with a colleague as we're talking about research, that's super fun time versus the group lunches at work or the group dinners at home or cocktail parties. And so I found that for me, actually one-on-one time was very worthwhile. And by tracking your time, you can identify, okay, what are these sources of fulfillment and joy in the way you spend your time? You can also see just how much time you're spending on your various activities. So you can pull out, holy cow, I had no idea that I was spending X amount of time on said activity that is like not fun and in many cases not necessary. And this is like, for those of us who are time poor, it's very helpful. Like, okay, this is time that I can reclaim and reallocate. Can I share an analogy to highlight just how important this is?
Oh, sure.
Because our time is limited. And there's an analogy that I love and I continue to touch back on in my own time spending decisions, as well as I actually teach a course to our MBAs and executive MBAs at UCLA that is pulling the research together, applying the science of happiness to life design is what the course is called. And in the first day of the course, I share this short film, which shows this analogy so well. And in the film, a professor walks into his classroom and on the desk in front of the class, he puts a large clear jar. And then into the jar, he pours golf balls. And then he asks the students, is the jar full? The students nod their head because it looks full, but nope. Then he pours pebbles into the jar and the pebbles fill the spaces between the golf balls up to the top. He asks the students again, is the jar full? Students nod their head. Yes, it looks full, but nope. Then he pours sand into the jar and the sand fills all those spaces between the golf balls, between the pebbles up to the top. Is the jar full? By this point, the students are like laughing and like, yes, the jar looks full. But no, there was one more step. He pulls out 2 bottles of beer. He opens one, pours it into the jar. He opens the other, and then he goes and sort of perches himself on the front of the desk, and he explains. And he takes a sip of the beer, and he explains, this jar represents the time of your life. The golf balls are those things that really matter to you, your relationships with your family, your friendships, the work that you do that is so in line with your purpose and your goals that feels really worthwhile. The pebbles are the other important things in your life, like your job, your house. The sand is everything else. The sand is all of that stuff that fills your time without you even thinking about it, with like unintentionally, without even choosing it. And what's really important to know is that had he poured the sand into the jar first, all of the golf balls would not have fit. That's to say that if we let our time get filled, it absolutely will get filled, but not necessarily with the stuff that matters to you. And so what you need to do is put your golf balls into your time jar first, into your schedule of the week. Put those activities that are so worthwhile, those activities that do connect you with these people that are so important to you, the work hours, like the work project or task that is so important to you and is fulfilling and will sort of propel you forward in what matters to you. Put those into your schedule first, because sand will absolutely fill everything else. But at least this way, at the end of the week, even if you were busy, you can look back and feel fulfilled because you've invested in those things that matter to you. So what the time tracking exercise does is it allows you to identify what are your golf balls. What are those things that you can put in should and must from a sense of satisfaction and offsetting burnout and sense of fulfillment and happiness, is you have to put those into your schedule and protect time for them. Others won't do that for you. You need to take the responsibility for that. And then, yes, this other stuff will fill in. My sand is email. Others, when I have my students do this, their sand is whether social media or meetings that are not all that necessary. But it's so important that our weeks don't just get filled with sand and keeping us busy, but not necessarily spending our time on those things that matter. And then one of the students was like, Professor, what's the deal with the beer? And he's like, so glad you asked.
Yes, I wanted to ask. Glad you went here.
Yep. And the beer goes to show that no matter how busy you feel, how full your schedule is, you always have time for a drink with a friend. So whether it's beer or soda, it's just to make this point that absolutely amidst the busyness of our lives, it's those people that we do and can and must sort of make time for.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, I also have to hear about you talked about how we engage with things and our mindset can improve anything and everything, maybe even
I know, overstatement, but not actually.
well, even the commuting and
Yeah.
the work and the housework, even if you're only spending 0.57 hours on that housework, like the quote unquote average American.
I agree with you. Who is that lucky person?
I'm putting my hat on. There's lots of zeros from folks who are traveling. Like, hey, I don't know how to clean my hotel room.
It's also averaging. Yes, there's a lot of zeros because this is picking up the American Time Use Survey data is picking up on a day. And you might be catching people, whether they're on holiday or on the day that they are not doing housework. But that aside, there are, of course, ideally, sure, we would spend all of our days and our entire schedule on golf balls, but that's not the reality, right? We do have work to do. And there are strategies to make these times that are less fun more fun. Bundling is a super easy one. So this is taking from some of the motivation research by Katie Milkman and her colleagues. And it's such a simple idea, but it's so effective, is taking an activity you don't want to do, like commuting, and bundle it with an activity that you do want to do so that that time itself feels more fun. So like commuting, instead of sitting in the car and like mindlessly flipping through radio stations, if instead you turned on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
There we go, Cassie.
Yeah.
Well played. Thank you.
Then all of a sudden that time in the car feels more worthwhile. Or one of my readers, she reached out, she's like, the bundling strategy was so awesome because her husband, all of a sudden ironing was his like favorite activity of the week, because what he did Saturday afternoon, he would set up the ironing board in front of the TV, and that was when he watched sports. So it was bundling the chore of ironing with watching sports. And then all of a sudden, that time was his sort of delectable time that he got to watch sports and nobody got to bother him about it. There's also bundling during our work hours. So, I talked about social connection is so important for happiness. For many Americans, a lot of their hours spent working are not particularly happy. And figuring out, okay, how can we bundle social connection into our work days? And this is so important. I mean, Gallup has a funny question in their poll, which asks, do you have a best friend at work? And I say it's funny because it sounds like something my fourth grader would ask. It's like, do you have a best friend? But it is so predictive. This was, and I'm sure the numbers aren't too far off, but pre-pandemic, only 2 out of 10 Americans said that they had a best friend at work. Those who did were more than twice more engaged in their jobs. They're better performers on their jobs. They're more satisfied at work, and job satisfaction is a very big predictor of overall life satisfaction. If we can infuse friendship into our work hours, then that is like, I'm framing it as bundling. But then that work itself becomes more fun. You look forward to the workday because you get to see your friend. When you are sort of confronted with challenges in work, which of course we all are, you have that person that you can rely on and sort of find that social support. So it's like wins are more fun and losses are less painful when you have friendship in the workplace. So that's one way. Another is identifying your purpose. So, and I know it sounds so lofty, but I actually in the book. So Happier Hour, as I mentioned, I teach this course, Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design. And each week I give my students an experiential assignment so that they can apply these empirical findings to their own lives and feel the benefits of it. And every time I've taught the course, I see significant boosts in sense of meaning, happiness, sense of connection, sense of accomplishment. And in Happier Hours, since not everyone can take my course at UCLA, is I share those assignments as exercises in the book so that readers can apply them. So the time tracking exercise is one. There's another exercise that helps you identify your purpose, and it's called the 5 Whys exercise. And so what it is you asking yourself, like, okay, what do you do for your job? Why do you do that? And then your answer for that, you ask yourself, well, why is that important? And once you ask yourself why, 5 layers into really why you do the work that you do, what it uncovers for you as an individual is what really motivates you. What is your purpose? Like, what is your why? And the reason that this is so helpful is because it makes even those unfun parts of your job more fun because feel better, because they feel more worthwhile. You know why you're doing it. So when I did this exercise, I found it so helpful because it helped me identify my own purpose. So what is my job? I'm a business school professor. Why does one do that? Well, to create knowledge through research and disseminate knowledge through teaching. And then I asked myself, well, why is that important? And then my answer to that, why is that? And what I uncovered is that for me, the purpose of my work is to create knowledge about what makes people happy and to disseminate knowledge about what makes people happy. This is helpful for a couple of reasons with respect to time, is that it helps me filter out what are those activities, work activities that I should be saying yes to or I should be saying no to. If it's something that is in line with helping me create knowledge about what makes people happy or disseminate knowledge about what makes people happy, then I will do it. Like joining you in our time today, this is about disseminating knowledge about what makes people happy. But not only does it help me decide what activities to spend my time on, it makes even unfun work activities more palatable and more fun because I know the why of it. So email, I do not like. That feels like sand. It can absorb my entire work day, work week, and I feel like I get nothing accomplished. But when I'm like, okay, actually, email with a research collaborator, that's about creating knowledge about what makes people happy. Emails with my students, that's about disseminating knowledge about what makes people happy. So all of a sudden, that particular activity of email feels better because I know the why of it.
And so with the 5 whys, so you landed on your purpose is to discover and disseminate knowledge about what makes people happy. And I don't know if we landed there from the 3rd or the 4th why, wasn't it?
That was the 5th one.
But so I guess, if I may, what happens if I say why again to that? Well, why does that matter?
Because I want to spread happiness. And for me, that's really important. And what's really helpful about this exercise is that what you identify for your purpose, it is unique to you. It doesn't have to align with other people's notions of what is the sort of ultimate worthwhile metric of success, which is so helpful because this idea of what success means, there's so many dimensions that go into it. And there will always be individuals who are doing better than, you on one of those dimensions, but those are things that might not actually even matter to you. So by identifying your own purpose, that's what you should use when you see a gap between what you're doing and what you aspire towards. That should be the motivator. When you actually see that you're making progress, is so much more fulfilling compared to what we generally do is rely on social comparison and like, how am I doing in life or how am I doing in my job by looking at how you're doing compared to others, which through social comparison, it's one of these sort of cognitive biases, or in this case, is sort of our cognitive tendencies, our psychological tendencies that can really serve to undermine our happiness. Now, if your question of like, well, why is spreading happiness important? Then I can tell you, my 7th why of pointing to research that shows that happiness, well, some might think it's sort of this frivolous or even selfish pursuit. Research shows that when you feel happier, when you take care of your emotional well-being, it allows you to show up better for those around you in the work that you do. Being happier has positive consequences across our domains of life. Studies show that it makes us perform better in the office. So when we are made to feel happier, it makes us more creative. We become more adaptive in our problem solving. We're more collaborative. Happy employees are more engaged. They're more likely to show up at work. They're less likely to call in sick. And so it helps in not only you and your work, but organizations. It also helps us in our interpersonal relationships. When we feel happier, we like others more. We are liked by others more. It makes us nicer. And there's even work that shows that when we feel happier, it has positive health benefits too, that we're more likely to stick to our treatment regimes. We have higher thresholds for pain. We react better to physiological stressors. Happier people live longer. And so by helping people be happier based off of the research, not just by opinion, right? Based off of the research, then it allows them to not only feel happier, which is such a wonderful outcome, but also it allows them to show up better within their organizations and within their families. So it's sort of spreading this goodness. So that's like my 8th why.
Well, no, that's cool. Well, I guess what I'm driving at with the whys is that all sounds super awesome. But just to illustrate the technique, I'll say, and why do all those things matter, Cassie?
So I felt very satisfied with my 5th layer. But yes, it's really helpful because when individuals do this, it uncovers for them what drives them in their work. And oftentimes that first layer of why is your job description, or it can be, some people are like, well, it's to make money. And it's like, well, why is that particular job the way that you're looking to make money? Or it could even help uncover what's really driving you wanting financial security. It's like, if it's like ultimately to make it so that your kids are less stressed, or if you're going in the job description route, like, well, why does that matter to you? So often in just 2 layers more of whys, folks identify for themselves, like, oh, the thing that actually matters to me is this. And in recognizing that can help you figure out, all right, what are those work projects that you want to take on? Because they are going to help propel you in your particular direction that is, quote unquote, success for you and are in line with your goals and values. One of the most painful ways, actually, in the time tracking exercise, when people are looking, okay, across those least happy activities of theirs, what the dimensions, the sources of the unhappiness, a common one is a waste of time. That is that you've spent your time on something that just felt meaningless and unnecessary. Those are the same things, but they show up. And so like in the workplace, for example, those meetings that are like, oh my gosh, that was such a waste of an hour. Those are the work hours that bring those averages way down, because it's like, like my time is precious, right? All of our time is precious. The hours of our days sum up to the years of our lives. So how we spend our hours is how we spend our lives. And when those hours are wasted, that's the thing that sort of is soul sucking, right? And so whether during the workday or even outside of work, the social media often gets picked up as this sort of like, people reflect back. It's like, oh my gosh, that felt like such a waste and it felt not good. And this isn't someone else being like, you shouldn't be on social media, or you shouldn't, spend 10 hours a night watching TV. This is in their own ratings. And it's what's interesting is also in the time tracking, one student and in the reflection piece afterwards, they're like, I thought activity that would be really fun was actually less fun than it was. So they thought that TV was their like happy time, but they realized that after that first hour, all subsequent hours were actually quite unhappy. And then there were these activities that they dreaded, that in their ratings, they're like, actually, it got 9s and 10s, like socializing. This person dreaded socializing. This person dreaded exercising. But then in coming out of those activities, they're like, actually, apparently, according to their own ratings, actually made them feel really great and fulfilled and is worth the time, even when we feel like we don't have a lot of it.
Absolutely. That is powerful when you have those surprises. come up. And I'm thinking about Dr. David Burns, Feeling Good. There's a lot of exercises along those lines, which, hey, surprise, this thing you were procrastinating wasn't that horrible, was it? How about that? Or surprise, exercise and socializing is amazing.
What I think that would be yet another helpful strategy in terms of where, as I mentioned, so like we want to not only identify and spend our time on those activities that are worthwhile, but also how, when we are engaging in those activities, make them worthwhile. Because a whole lot of the time we're distracted. So research shows that we are distracted, not thinking about what we are currently doing, almost 47% of the time.
Yeah.
That is almost half of the time. And so in this research, what they did was they would ping people over the course of their day and ask, what are you doing? As well as, what are you thinking about? As in, are you thinking about what you're currently doing? Are you thinking about something else? And how happy are you? And as I mentioned, people are not thinking about what they're doing a whole lot of the time. More than half the time, or almost half of the time, they are not thinking about what they're currently doing. And also what was interesting is that people are less happy when their mind is wandering than when they are engaged in their activity. And so if you're thinking about like, oh my gosh, we are distracted so much of the time. And if you're spending time on a golf ball, on something that matters to you, but you're missing it because your mind is somewhere else, like planning for what's next or stressing about what's next, then you're missing that moment and the time that you're spending. One of a huge source of distraction are our cell phones, right? These are these very handy devices that allow us to get so much done. And by being able to constantly do other things and be aware of what other people are doing on social media, because you're like, oh my gosh, at every moment, there's other things that you could and maybe should be doing. It draws us out of the moment. And so something that is very effective is actually carving out time as no phone zones, as in putting the phone away out of sight, which makes it more out of mind, so that you can be more engaged in what you're doing. This helps during the workday for that important work that you're doing that needs your deep thinking. Put your phone on silent, away, close out of email so that you don't get those interruptions that are pulling you out of the moment, that are keeping you from getting into flow, that flow state where you're so engaged in what you're doing, you lose sense of time. And that's when you're most creative. That's when you're at your best. But it's not just during the workday, right? It's like in the evenings when you're with your family or on the weekends, as carving out, putting your phones away, making them no phone zones so that when you're spending that time, your mind isn't somewhere else. So often, something I mentioned earlier is another really important and perhaps surprising finding is that a lot of our happiest moments are in very ordinary activities. So even if, forget time tracking, just reflecting, thinking back over the last 2 weeks, when did you feel the most joy? So often when I ask people to reflect, their joyful activities are so mundane. It is one of my most joyful activities is my weekly coffee date with my 7-year-old daughter. And this started when she was really little, born out of a very functional routine on my way of dropping her at our preschool before going into the office. I wanted caffeine. And so we would stop at the local coffee shop, and it was just 30 minutes that was time for the two of us. She got her hot chocolate. I have my flat white. We munch on croissants and we're chatting. It's the two of us together. And this routine, we turned into this treasured ritual. And we actually went, today is Thursday, we went this morning. 4 years later, we still do this. And it's just 30 minutes, but it's so powerful in affecting how satisfied I am in my life, how happy I feel in my days. And what's interesting is often, though happiness comes out of these ordinary moments, so often we miss them because we're distracted or because we're subject to hedonic adaptation. That is, our tendency to get used to things over time. When we do the same thing again and again, we are with the same person over and over, we stop noticing them so much. They don't have as strong of an emotional impact on us. Now, it's good that we adapt in the face of negative experiences and activities because it makes us more resilient. But it's bad when we adapt to the good stuff because we stop noticing, because it leads us to miss out on the joy that's right there in the time we're spending. And I share a couple in Happier Hour, a couple of exercises or strategies to help offset hedonic adaptation so that we do continue to find joy in our joys in life. And one of them is counting times left, because so often, because these are everyday experiences, we assume they will continue to happen every day, just in the way that they are. But that's not true, right? Time passes and our circumstances change. And so in counting times left, first identify this activity that brings you joy. Then calculate how many times have you done this in your life thus far. So for my coffee dates with my daughter, Lita, we've done it for over a bunch of years now. And then counting that as well as during my maternity leave, where every day I would bundle her up and go to the coffee shop for sanity. I calculate we've gone on about 400 coffee dates together so far. Then the next step is calculate how many times do you have left in your life to do this, accounting for factors that will change in your circumstances. And if your joyful activity involves someone else, accounting for factors that will change in their circumstances. And so I calculated, so Lita's now 7. When she's 12, I suspect she'll probably rather go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me. And then she's going to go off to college. And then she's going to go, live in New York, whatever it is. I calculated that we have about 230 coffee dates together left. And then the last step in this exercise is calculate of your total times, what percentage do you have left? I realized that Lita and I have 36% of our coffee dates together left. That's way less than half. And she's only 7 years old. Now, what's the effect of this? It is, at first, you're like, sad. But the positive effect far outweigh any initial sadness, because what it does is it motivates me to make the time. This is a golf ball. I put it in my schedule. I am not taking meetings before 9 o'clock on Thursday mornings. Actually, it's summer, so we could do it on Thursday. Now that she's not in preschool anymore and school starts earlier, it's moved to Saturday mornings in general. But it makes me make the time, no matter how busy the week seems, that we spend this half hour together. We prioritize it. Also, it affects how I engage during that time, right? Because knowing that this time is precious, knowing that these dates, these minutes that we have together are in fact limited in this sort of lovely connecting way. I'm like, my phone is away. So this is a no phone zone. And also that sort of constant to-do list that runs in my mind, always thinking about planning for what's next, gets quieted because I'm like, this is the time that matters, not what's happening next. I draw my attention back to the here and now so that I don't miss it. And as I said from the outset, it is those connections, those relationships that are so crucial to our happiness, whether it's having a best friend at work or having those people in our lives that whom we love and who we feel loved by, that it absolutely makes it feel worthwhile.
All right. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
I love the quote by Abraham Lincoln, or he's said to have quoted, "People are about as happy as they make up their minds to be." Because what I think that shows is that happiness is a choice. And if we're intentional with how we spend our time, we can choose to be happier.
All right. And a favorite book?
Well, my own book, Happier Hour. But also, I love reading fiction. And there's a book called The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which references the life and work of Virginia Woolf. But it's actually, I love the novel because it picks up on sort of what I said today, where there's so much life that is lived in those moments lived within the hours of our days that color our sense of satisfaction and purpose and the story of our lives.
All right. And if folks want to contact you or get in touch, where would you point them?
I would point them to my website, CassieMHolmes.com. And there is where my research is. You can find more information about my book, Happier Hour. And then I am on LinkedIn. So you can connect with me and follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not on other social media because in my time tracking, I found that wasn't fun time for me.
And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
I would say identify those hours or those activities within your day that bring you that sense of purpose and joy, and invest in those times wholly and protect time for those times.
All right, Cassie, this has been a treat. Thank you. I wish you many happier hours.
Thank you so much for having me, Pete. This was fun.
I really love Cassie's perspective on the 5 whys approach. And in my own experience, when I've played with the 5 whys, I found that 5 is probably the mode or most oftenly occurring number of whys you need to get to the real root of things. But what I find really fun and interesting when I do this with myself and others, you know you're at the end of your whys, whether it's 4 of them or 7 of them, when one more why just sort of leaves you dumbfounded and stupefied. Like, well, because that just matters. Or like, what are you even talking about? That's just like, why wouldn't you love that thing? Or like, because it's good for mankind. Well, why does that matter? It's like, well, I mean, like, it just does. That just does. Like you got nothing left when you rack your brain. And that's when you know you're done with your 5 whys. And you've gotten to the root there, whether it's 4 whys or 7 whys. Good stuff. And I really challenge you to not accept 1 or 2 or 3 whys, but to really get to the core of things. And it's cool to see the patterns that emerge when you do this repeatedly in terms of core values. That, this just matters to me. And that's just the end of the story. Whys complete. To check out the show notes and the transcript and the links to items that we've referenced, again, those are over at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP884. I hope to catch you next time. And peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.